Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and a Merry Christmas Eve. Uh, today, we're going to talk about one of the most popular Christmas Eve stories, A Christmas Carol. Wait a second, Randall, didn't we do an episode about Christmas Carol last year?
I think we did two, but yeah, we
You're
did.
right. Oh my God, are we doing a third episode about A Christmas Carol?
Looks like it. Yeah, I
It
thought those
doesn't.
are great episodes. So if you're interested in a deep dive into just the general, uh, just the general knowledge of the Christmas Carol story, Dickens classic, and all the adaptations, you should listen to our two episodes from last year.
The first episode, we just talk about it as a literary work. We talk about Dickens, what was going on at the time of his writing, both historically and personally. And then the second episode, we cover, I think, almost 10 of the most well regarded adaptations for film.
Right. We talk about a bunch of adaptations.
A
Yeah, it's
lot
been
of them.
we established that I think it's probably been adapted more than any other work in in the English language. And
Right.
nobody
And I
talks
remember
about it.
because there were so many of them, I had to see stuff I had never seen or hadn't seen in years to talk about it well. And I remember, much to everybody's chagrin, I skipped one that you liked. I skipped the Muppets Christmas Carol. Did I even call it by its right name? Is that
What is
right?
what is it called? It's called, let me look it up.
Okay. Yeah, we're really top.
It's
This whole
called The Muppet Christmas Carol, and it came out in 1992.
right. So it's called the Muppets Christmas Carol. I just want to make sure because there's a the and not an a.
Well, it's
So
The Muppet. It's no S, no plural on
oh, the Muppet.
Muppet is plural already.
Fair enough. The Muppet Christmas Carol. Anyway, I did not see it last year because I remember when it had come out and I was in my mid 20s and I was in film school and I'm like, this is for babies. And I thought, if I just let this one slide, Randall and I can talk about everything else. So this year, I finally got around to watching it. But before we get into it, as always, if you're new to this channel, please like, subscribe, and share. And hey, even if you're old to this channel and you haven't done it, again, please like, subscribe, and share. I know it's Christmas Eve. You got a lot to do, but I promise it'll be worth your while. Now, if you want to talk to us and say, hey, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, which was like 3 weeks ago, great. What's a good way to reach us to wish us happy holiday cheer?
Well, just check out our website, chrisandrandall.com. Also, we're big on Facebook. You can go to Arts Entertainment with Chris and Randall on Facebook.
Excellent. So again, we really want to hear what you think. You can either be mean and tell us what you don't like, and you can reward us with a present of future episodes you would like us to do, so that next year Randall and I don't have to think. We can just follow your advice. It's interesting. So as I was saying, I was like, I was like Scrooge, like, Muppets, bah humbug. What a cash grab. And I love Michael Caine, but this was a period of time where literally Michael Caine would just appear on a Wendy's commercial if you paid him enough. So I was a cold-hearted, embittered man. And I started to notice this year on YouTube, a number of like late 30 something, early 40 something millennials were talking about how they thought this was like the definitive Christmas Carol, which I'm like, okay, that's insane. But you actually do think it's like one of the great Christmas Carol films, right?
Yeah, my personal opinion, yeah. We did a deep dive in all these Christmas carols, and I mean, the only one this is definitely like one of the best, if not the best. I think it's at the top of my list at the moment. I mean, if I had
Okay.
to talk about an adaptation that was the best, I mean, it might be this one, and I'll tell you why. It's because
We'll get into
mostly.
it in a moment. This is the beginning of the story where the cold-hearted man, I being Ebenezer Scrooge, you're like my Bob Cratchit. You have spirit and belief, and I'm a middle-aged man who's lost his faith in his childhood dreams of the Muppets. We're folks, we're doing this analogy style, okay? So anyway, a little bit of the backstory of the film. So all of you grew up with the Muppets, I hope. I grew up with the Muppets. Jim Henson created the Muppets in the early 60s. By the late 60s, he was part of the Children's Television Network workshop, and they created Sesame Street. And Sesame Street was wonderful. Did you watch that as a kid?
Sesame Street, yes.
Right, it was wonderful. And then that begot the Muppet Show in the mid 70s, which was on commercial TV, but still just brilliant satire. Then in 1979, I remember being 13 years old and seeing the Muppet movie. And then the 80s came and they made more Muppet movies. Did they make more? The Muppet Show ran through the 80s, right?
I'd have to look it up, but yeah, I think it did. Let me look it up.
Yeah, it ran through the 80s. And so did the movies. And Sesame Street's still on the air. And all of this is, I would argue that Jim Henson was the Walt Disney of the Muppets. He was the Walt Disney of the Muppets. So in May of 1990, he suddenly passed away. And that was a big deal. I mean, that's it. There was a fear, he had always wanted the Muppets to outlive him. There was a lot of people who had worked as puppeteers and all of that. And it was a big moment. So anyway,
The Muppet Show's first run went to 1981, and
oh
then
wow,
Jim Henson died in 1990, so like 9 years
right,
later.
yeah, May of 1990. But they were still making the movies, and it basically the company fell upon being run by his son Brian, who was 28 at the time, and a talent agent, Bill Haber, told him that he thought Christmas Carol is the greatest story of all time, and you should do it. And then he went over to ABC Television and said, "Hey, let's have the Muppets do Christmas Carol." And ABC Television's like, "This is great, let's do it." So they went back to Brian, like, "Hey, I sold it." And Brian Henson all of a sudden found himself with something to do, and they worked on so many versions of the script that at some point, and this is when ABC just had gotten purchased by Disney. Disney looked at what they were doing, go, "This is too good for TV. We're going to make a movie." Now, Jerry Jewell, who had written for the Muppet Show and had written the scripts for all the Muppet movies, he was hired to write the script, and he did something pretty cool, wouldn't you say, Randall?
Yeah, by casting Charles Dickens
Well, yeah, putting Charles Dickens in the story as
so
the
he could
narrator.
narrate. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that. I mean there are other Christmas Carol adaptations with narration that's lifted from the book, but to actually put Charles Dickens, Gonzo plays Charles Dickens, to actually put him in the adaptation, have him talk directly to the audience, that's a great move. I mean, that was very smart. It works
I
great.
mean, it's interesting because in almost most of the cinematic adaptations, it opens with maybe the camera will pan to the first page of A Christmas Carol, or maybe a narrator every so often will just say a few words. But by putting Charles Dickens as an actual interlocutor, along with Ratso, who operates almost like a Greek chorus. I love Ratso, by the way. Is it Ratso or is it Rizzo?
I think it's Rizzo.
Rizzo, right? Because I'm thinking of Ratso Rizzo from Midnight Cowboy, which I'm sure they were thinking of too when they came up with that name, because they're very devious people, the folks at the Sesame Street. But anyway, it's interesting because Dickens himself, when he was alive for 30 years, would go all over reading and performing A Christmas Carol. And often we've talked about it before that Christmas Carol is done as a solo show. So there's such beauty in the prose that the more you can put it into an adaptation, I feel, the more you feel. I mean, and I think most people have said this about the people who really like this, and you have said this too, is that it's one of the most faithful adaptations. in that it really sticks to the text. The
Yeah,
text.
it's surprisingly faithful. I mean, even with Muppet hijinks thrown in there every now and then. I mean, it's it's surprisingly faithful to the book. And I don't know if you allow me to talk about it, Chris. I could talk about Kane's performance and what I
Well,
like
I'm going to
about
get
it.
to that in a moment, but before we talk about the human actors, I really want to give it up to the Muppet actors. You were talking about how Gonzo was chosen to play Dickens because they felt like he was the least likely person to play Dickens. I should have looked up the name of the voice actor, but
Yeah, that was
uh,
written somewhere like in the trivia on IMDb's page or something.
it is really such a great performance because Gonzo, if you're a fan of the show, he's not, there's nothing literary about him. His voice is kind of scranky, it's not English. It's not, it's such an off choice.
Well, to be honest, like if you think of a writer,
Yeah.
Gonzo really he fits the bill.
I guess so, but it's a very interesting choice. And then to add Rizzo the Rat as his partner and sidekick, I think you know it's a very dark story, and this is a very dark production. In fact, Henson has said when he was working on it, Brian Henson, he said you need to go to those dark places to make the ending as joyous as it can be. And I really feel like the traditionally in Muppet movies, the Muppets are very zany and off the wall. And in this movie, I would argue for the most part, the zaniness and the humor that we normally associate with Muppet performances really rests with Gonzo and Rizzo.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, there's hijinks throughout, but yeah, Gonzo and Rizzo do a lot of comic relief. The Waldorf and Statler, the critics, they're in there for comic
Yeah,
relief a
but they're
lot.
also
They're great.
hardcore comic. Yeah, and maybe even Fozzie the Bear as Fozziwig, which is obviously the role he was meant to play. But it's very interesting that for the most part, the Muppets actually kind of rein in their performance.
Well, they're all really well cast. I think that's what you're keen into. I mean, I don't think they are reining them in. I think that just the every role they give, every single character is perfect. I mean, for instance, Miss Piggy, she doesn't even pop up until like halfway through the movie or something, and she's well, I'm not gonna ruin it, but
Oh, you can, because look, everybody knows the story. It's okay. This is
well, she's
folks.
Cratchit's wife, right? She's
Yeah,
Kermit's wife, obviously, and
yeah.
she doesn't pop till halfway through the movie, and it's perfect. I mean, she doesn't
But
have a lot of screen time, but for what she does, the role, I mean,
but
perfectly
she does
cast.
not play too much of her traditional Mrs. Piggy humor. Yeah, there's like around the end, there's a very funny bit, which is very classic Mrs. Piggy. I'm hostile. I'm angry. I'm wrong. But when she is really dealing with the loss of Tiny Tim, Frank Oz really just plays it straight. I mean, it's a
Well,
much more. I mean, she is really Mrs. Piggy is acknowledging the death of her son
right.
and how it affects the family and her daughters and her other son.
Well,
And
yeah.
there's nothing funny in that.
Well, I'll
It
say
is.
something about the Muppets here. I mean, I don't think the Muppets, as Henson conceived them, were supposed to be just Punch and Judy type puppets that were just supposed to be doing hijinks and comedy gags all the time. I mean, I think that Henson really saw the Muppets as an art project, and he thought the Muppets were he thought the Muppets could communicate any kind of human emotion. I mean, I definitely think that from the start the Muppets were layered characters. They they just so I'm not surprised to see the Muppets actually act, so to speak.
Well, I mean, I think you are right that if you look at vignettes in the first Muppet movie, like It's Not Easy Being Green or The Rainbow Connection, or just certain episodes in the Muppet Show or on Sesame Street, right? They have these nice, quiet, introspective moments, and because they are not animation and they're not claymation, but they're made out of fabric, Uh, for some reason, we're able to really imbue a lot more of a range of emotion. But I'm saying that the choices that they're making, because again, it's a very subdued Mrs. Piggy, and it's Steve. So when Jim Henson had always been the voice of Kermit the Frog, and this is the debut of a voice actor puppeteer named Steve Wiltmore, and Steve Wiltmore had been a puppeteer, Whitmire, sorry, but this was his first time as Kermit. He would go on to be Kermit forever, and I felt like I think really the best Muppet performance is his performance as Kermit as Bob Cratchit. It's a fine line, because if you think about it, Kermit the Frog is so iconic, and yet, and it sounds very strange, but you buy Kermit playing Bob Cratchit.
Yeah, well, just to talk about the Muppets for a moment. Yeah, sure. The Muppets are perfectly cast, but then one strength that the Muppets have always had is if there is a role that a pre-existing Muppet character doesn't fit, they can just make a new Muppet. And in this movie, that's what they do. So,
Well, yeah, we can get to that in a sec, sure. In fact, the ghosts are a really good example of this because originally they were just going to have the Muppets play the ghosts. So apparently, according to various accounts, Robin the Frog or Scooter was going to be the ghost of Christmas Past. Miss Piggy was going to be the ghost of Miss Christmas Present. And Gonzo, before he was written to portray Charles Dickens, or Animal as the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And it's really interesting because the only spectral characters from the actual Muppet family that we see is Statler and Waldorf as the brothers Marley. I do love the idea, by the way. Did you get it, Robert Marley?
what? What? Tell me.
Bob Marley?
Oh, right.
Very subtle pun.
Right, and the Whalers, right?
Right. So, and the Whalers. So, because it's normally just Jacob Marley. And it's very interesting because, and I think it's because this is not an animated. This is live action with puppets or Muppets. Uh, the Muppets are not inherently scary, and normally in every production, even animated productions, it's human beings, and then the ghosts are the weird part. The ghosts are the odd duck, and then everyone else is a human. So normally almost every production when Jacob Marley comes, it's really scary, right? Every version we've had that's
Well,
done
going
well.
back to the source material, I mean, yeah, Jacob Marley is supposed to be frightening. Dickens gave him made him kind of made his body kind of gross. He made his jaw like broken, and I mean,
Yeah.
uh, most adaptations though they don't do a very good job with it. I mean, I don't know. He never his character never seems to come across as very scary on the screen, and
Well, I mean, definitely depends. Sometimes I think they get Jacob Marley just right, and other times it just looks like the world's lowest budget. But if you do it really right, and I think there was one, was that the Alistair Sim one that was really scary? I think you
the
and I talked
animated
about.
one.
No, that's very scary, but also the original Alistair Sim one is very scary.
Okay, I can't remember what it looked like now, but yeah, I mean,
But those two are really great and expressionistics. The funny thing is, Statler and Waldorf are hysterical. They have a great, funny song, and they seem so organic. They're really basically cutting out all the fear that was written in that scene. And it is not a scary scene until, after all that humor, their souls are sucked back up to hell.
well,
And that's so jarring, right? The last 10 seconds where after you've been laughing so hard and enjoying the merriment, to just see their spectral bodies sucked back up to hell so quickly and so frighteningly, it's very jarring, isn't
well,
it?
that's
I
almost a
thought,
gag by itself. But I think that what that scene really captures is what the whole script captures is the emotional significance of that scene. That the Marleys, they're trapped by their chains, and they talk about, all the everything that needs to be explained is explained correctly. It hits the right emotional notes. I mean, I think that That's something the script does really well. A lot of other adaptations, I don't know if they get the Marley part totally correct. Uh, because one thing that in the Muppets movie does one thing that the Muppet movie does is Scrooge and the Marleys. You see that they have a pre-existing relationship. You see that they're very similar. And the Marleys are coming to tell Scrooge that he's just like them, and look
Yeah,
what's going to happen.
and
And
and,
you
and, and
you
you're
really
right.
get that sense in the Muppet movie, and I think a lot of other adaptations miss that somehow.
Well, because if you think about it, Jacob Marley is always Ebenezer Scrooge's greatest critic because Jacob Marley is is basically a variation of him. So when he is criticizing Scrooge to learn the errors of his ways, he's calling him out because he knows him. But what's really fascinating is the choice to actually create three different brand new character Muppets for the three ghosts. I thought they were beautiful. What
Yeah,
did
that was
you
a great
think?
choice. Amazing.
I mean, let's start with the Ghost of Christmas Past. It almost looked like something out of Miyazaki.
Well, you know what I read that they shot that puppet in water, and that's why it looks like that. I mean,
It's so
it's striking.
ethereal
Yeah.
and striking, and it looks like. And the best thing about that one, actually, all three of them, not one of those three Muppets look anything like the Muppets stylistically, aesthetically, that are the Muppets of the rest of the ensemble.
Well, that's the really. I mean, maybe you can attribute that to Brian Henson. Because he understood his dad's work. He's not trying to reiterate something that came before. And if you look at Jim Henson's work, over the years, he tried lots of experiments. He tried
You're
many
absolutely
different
like Dark
things.
Crystal, Fragile Rock. Yeah,
Right.
they were at that point. You're right; they were expanding into that kind of thing. You're absolutely right to begin with. So you look at her, and I honestly think, is it just called the Ghost of Christmas Present?
I think so.
That's my favorite. And I want to be really clear. It's my favorite Muppet of this movie. It's my favorite Ghost of Christmas Present
And, the
because
ghosts they're very true to the text, the original text. And I mean, they're really well done. I mean, I don't know if there's, I don't know, a lot of adaptations. I don't know what it is about these adaptations, but a lot of adaptations will be very faithful with one ghost and then like go totally off the rails with another. I'm not sure
yeah.
why.
Well,
But
traditionally you get a willowy, thin woman who's with very pale skin and long blonde hair to play the Ghost of Christmas Past, and then you normally get some very fat comic actor to play the Ghost of Christmas Present. But instead, he really is a real cherubim. You know what I'm saying? There is something because it's not played by a real actor. It is. He starts out really as the world's largest baby, and he's such a large baby, and he's so disarmingly so a large baby that he's the first character to actually make a chink in the emotional defensive armor of Scrooge and gets him to laugh. Because, and I think it's this thing, he's so funny looking. You know what I'm saying? He's such a very comical looking doll of a Muppet in his movement and mannerism, voice, tonality, and how he constantly
right.
repeats
Well,
himself.
he's
That
completely
there's no other way but Scrooge or us as the audience goes, no. If Scrooge had not been moved by that to mirth and humor, we would not believe that Scrooge could ever
Well,
move.
it's true to Dickens' vision. The Ghost of Christmas Present lives in the present and enjoys the moment.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, this goes back to Kane's performance, so you won't let me talk about it right now. But
No,
Kane,
we're
the
going to get to
first
it in a minute.
time
I
he
just want to get the
smiles,
Muppets there too.
the first time Kane smiles is with the Ghost of Christmas Present, and it's an amazing moment. And I don't know how much thought Kane put into this part, but I mean,
We're going to get to
all
that.
right, fine,
I
fine.
promise. But I just want to get through the ghost. So, it's really cool because you get to watch the Ghost of Christmas Present says some of the wisest things in this version,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to watch him age.
Right. Well, that's all back to the original text. I mean, I like that they kept it true to that. It's very good. Another thing they did is like, Dickens' Christmas Present Ghost has some similarities with our modern conception of Santa Claus,
Yes.
and a lot of modern adaptations will shy away from that. right? Because they're like, well, we don't want to confuse people and blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
this adaptation didn't do that at all, which to its credit,
Yes.
because it really fits that role, it really fits that character.
Now, how scary and messed up, and again, kind of like Miyazaki, was the ghost of Christmas yet to come? It looked like almost like a giant mushroom.
Yeah, they did a great job with that guy.
I mean, that's always, I think, the biggest challenge is how do you make death scary when everybody else has done the black shroud?
Yeah,
But
I
that
mean, they had their own
absence of
take.
a
It looked.
face is
Mhm.
so that I think they got from Dark Crystal. What do you think?
Well, I mean, a lot of it goes to the original text. I mean, in the original text, he, I mean, that's all described, and he doesn't talk, and he just points with his gnarled, skinny, skeletal hand. And another thing that they did is, a lot of times they make that ghost into death, right? Where he's a skeleton. But in this adaptation, they stayed more true to the text, and he's like he's more of a, I don't know, just a very thin, gaunt person. It seems like.
Well, again, Henson said that the exception of Statler and Waldorf as the brothers Marley, he wanted the ghosts to. He didn't want to use the old Muppet characters. He wanted to create new characters that would better underline the ominous nature of ghosts.
Or
And
you're talking about Brian Henson, right? The
Ryan,
director,
right?
right? Jim Henson's
And
son.
there's a lovely choice that's not scary. It's the last thing I want to say, but who? What does Henson choose to play Scrooge's fellow peers of bankers and businessmen? What he goes with the pigs.
Yeah, he.
I
Well,
love
we
that.
we in the other Christmas carols we talked about. Well, in I think when we did the analysis of the original text, we talked about the Marxist
Yes,
Marxist analysis of Christmas Carol. Yeah, so Christmas Carol is essentially Marxist in a sense, and I mean it predates Marx's writings, but they come interestingly. We covered this already, but interestingly, Marx and Dickens they're living in London at around the same
at the
time.
exact same time, writing about the exact same experience.
Exactly, the same experience with the miseries of capitalism
Yeah,
at that moment,
and it's
especially.
such a great line. The pigs were saying, well, "It's going to be a cheap funeral," and then the line that I really think if Dickens was alive, he would have loved pigs. Is I don't mind going if a meal is provided.
I really think that comes from the original, but I don't know. But
So the
yeah, but it
original
was
line, it is Dickens wrote, "I don't mind going if lunch is provided." The
right.
only change they made to that line of dialogue is they substituted meal for lunch. But
Right,
the
and for Brian Henson to cast
picture
he cast
of
those rich guys as pigs. I mean, that's inspired casting. I mean, it's perfect.
it is like a George Nass cartoon from the 19th century. It's brilliant, and it's so subversive. And if you don't pay attention, somebody else who did a lovely one pointed out there's a lobster stuck on a wall Muppet because Dickens had made a reference to the smell of stinking lobsters hanging on a wall, a rooftop. So I mean, they really went deep. So okay, now we'll get into the humor. So I just wanted to say I came across before they cast Michael Caine, two people they thought of casting was David Warner, who was in Tron as the villain. He's Jack the Ripper in Time After Time. He's the villain in Titanic. And in the George C. Scott version of Scrooge, he's Freddy. And I think I've always wanted to see him play Scrooge. Sadly, I don't think that will happen. He's quite old now. But the other person they were thinking, and it's weird because I could clearly see if they had gone in a different direction and made like a 1980s Muppet movie, this would have been exactly who they would have gone with, was George Carlin.
Yeah, Carlin's barely an actor. I mean, it makes very little sense. But yeah,
And this would have been around the time that he did Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So to give you a sense of what kind of Carlin was going to show up. Like, yeah,
well, they were
Christmas.
thinking
Humbug.
right. So you can
What's
see
Christmas?
right. You can see what they're thinking. They're thinking they're going to get a strong comic actor. It's going to be a broad comedy and. But there's a real emotional center to A Christmas Carol, of course, and Well, I just want to say a couple things about Michael Caine before I start
Go for
talking about
it.
his performance. So, it says on IMDb in the trivia that Michael Caine really pursued this part. He really wanted to be a part of a Muppet production before he died.
Well, he,
And
he said, I'm going to play this movie like I'm working with the Royal Shakespeare Company. I will never wink. I will never do anything Muppety. I'm going to play Scrooge as if it is an utterly dramatic role and there are no puppets around me.
exactly. So Caine really wanted to do this. And a lot of actors, okay, when they're working with puppets, special effects in the movies, green screens, whatever it is, they get all like snobby, and they talk bad about it, and um, they look down on the whole experience, But Caine, he loves the Muppets and he loves this project, and he's trying to, yeah, and he's treating it like any other acting job, like he's performing, in the greatest theater in the world. And it's interesting. You can really see that in every single frame of this movie. In the very end, Caine is sitting at the. There's a Jim Henson ending, I call it, where Jim Henson endings in movies are where I think Jim Henson invented it, where you show like all of the characters, almost all the characters at the very end, even though they're mostly Muppets. So Caine's sitting there at the table, and he is looking around at the table. It's supposed to be a shot. The camera's pulling out. It's supposed to be a shot where everybody's sitting around at the table, enjoying the feast and enjoying each other's company. And you see Michael Caine look around the table and make eye contact with all the Muppets. I mean, there's another actor there, right? He's not doing
Yeah.
that, okay?
No, he's making sight lines, which is
He's
really hard.
Michael Caine is this is what actors would do on stage, right? They're going to make eye contact with the other
Yeah.
actors on stage, and Caine is doing that with the Muppets. I mean,
Well,
he's really
do you remember when he's dancing with the ghost of Christmas present?
yes.
And he's dancing poorly. That's the best part. He's shaking his like white man shoulder dance with that, and it's so hysterical because it's like that. You're right. Early in the scene when Scrooge's one of Scrooge's patrons comes to ask for an extension on his rent, he picks him up and throws him out the door. I mean,
Well,
you know,
that's a typical Muppet gag. Okay, when you have a human and Muppet interact, you have the human pick up the Muppet and throw them, and I'm glad they put at least one of those in there. I mean, I really enjoyed that. But yeah, I mean, Caine plays it off like he's really doing it. I mean, there's no like comic hijink going on there. Caine is really throwing somebody out. Even though it's like a Muppet.
well, I mean, I really want to get now. I want to do a deep dive into Kane because I think this is really where it gets interesting. So, Kane said that his inspiration was Wall Street cheats and embezzlers. I thought they represented a very good picture of meanness and greed. Now, I understand what he's saying. He went the Gordon Gekko approach, but I think the thing that I would argue to the adults watching this is that I'm not going to say we'll discuss later. Was this the best version of Ebenezer Scrooge? That we'll talk about later. But what is so unique about this version of Ebenezer Scrooge is how he is not working out of the Alistair Sim model. This is not, a guy who goes around saying Christmas, humbug. He doesn't do. It's not arch. He's not cantankerous. He's not funny. There are some very funny lines at the beginning of the story when the charity organization comes there and he argues, well, don't they have prisons? And then Bob Cratchit asks them, could you give me the day off? And he says, Christmas, a fine day to poach my pocket. There's a lot of really funny lines that most actors, when they play Scrooge, actually go for the funny because they're written that way. And I don't know about you, but I felt like before the visitation, Act One, there is a certain kind of emotional resignation that he approaches playing him. He plays him as a depressed man.
Yeah, I think that this is the best Scrooge performance of all time, and it's because of what you just said. And I think a lot of actors, they approach Scrooge. They like Kane said. I mean, Kane did say those things. He's going to play Scrooge as Gordon Gekko, Wall Street type, but I don't think he ends up playing him that way. I think he ends up
I
playing him.
agree.
I think he ends up playing him as an everyman, as like, because I think essentially the Scrooge story, Scrooge is us. He
Yeah.
is a normal, everyday, average person who has gotten wrapped up in the capitalist system, and all he thinks about is making money, and everything
Well,
has to be super efficient.
I,
And
oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
yeah, and he and he reclaims his humanity. That's what the part is about. And everything Kane does in this movie is so perfect. I mean, you don't see him crack a smile until he's hanging out with the Ghost of Christmas Present. Then when you're talking about him dancing with the Ghost of Christmas Present, I mean, it looks perfectly like someone who is overcome by joy, but has not danced in so long that they're super awkward. I mean,
Exactly.
it's perfect.
I know.
Everything is perfect in its
I think a lot
performance.
of people, and I know you do, think that there's the penurious nature of Ebenezer Scrooge is a comment on late state on capitalism of the Victorian era, and I'm not saying it isn't, but I think that, and this is written before Sigmund Freud, but I feel like there is psychology in Scrooge, and I think that Scrooge is an emotionally damaged person who, at a very early age, is shipped off to a boarding school, spends Christmas in the boarding school by himself reading books. And it's very clear that money is not a luxury he has or family. He's a product of an unloving society, an uncaring society, and he doesn't get a lot of the base human experiences until he becomes a young adult. We'll get into that later, but I really feel like Kane is the first person. Patrick Stewart does this a bit himself, who really deals with a man who's very hurt. Because there's a line that Dickens wrote that goes, bah, everyone says Christmas, bah humbug. But the actual line is, bah, it's humbug still, I won't believe it. And Jerry Jewell wrote the script, so I can't say whether it was Jerry Jewell's choice or Michael Caine's choice. I'm going to go and say it's Michael Caine's choice. He never says bah humbug. All he ever says is humbug. And the way he says humbug is a constantly, you can know the subtext of it is, I don't believe it. And a guy who doesn't believe it is a guy without hope. And again, he really does a lovely job of front loading it as this kind of guy. And I think you're right. I think that if I have one criticism of the arc of Ebenezer Scrooge in this film, I think you're right. I think once the ghosts come and unnerve him, I think once he is, he Christmas present clearly makes him happy, and Christmas yet to be is frightening, and of course his concern for Tiny Tim. But the one act, the first, whenever Ebenezer is visited by the ghost of Christmas past, it's really about his own trauma and his own past hurts. It's the other two visitations which will allow him to see beyond himself. And again, the real crime of Ebenezer Scrooge is that he didn't walk hand in hand with his fellow man. But I've always felt like the big turning point for Ebenezer Scrooge is when the woman he loves, Belle, who he is trying to save up to get married, leaves him. And in this movie, it's like a 30-second scene where all he says is, hey, Ebenezer, why aren't you going to marry me now? And he says, well, I don't have enough money. He said, well, you made partner. I said, yeah, but I still need more money. And I get it. What he means by that isn't it's not that he's greedy, I would argue. It's that he wants to have a certain lifestyle to be a good provider for the woman he loves. And her sole response is, you once loved me. Then she gets up, she walks away, Scrooge is upset, and that's it. And I hate to use this word in case children. Hey, if you're an adult, please cover your child's. Okay. She's such a bitch. That's like the bitchiest thing, right? Like, imagine if you said to a woman, I love you, and I'm trying to save up for you, and said, you once loved me, and that's it. So like, oh, well, maybe he's better off without Belle, because she sounds kind of mean and unrealistic and cold. And then I will get to why I'm right about why that was wrong later. But I'll say what I also really like is how Kane cannot sing. He's never been in a movie before where he had to sing. He's not a good singer. There's an interview with Kane in the recording studio where Kane admits that he can't even sometimes remember the lyrics or stay in tune. And they have to work with him. Paul Williams, we'll get to him in a moment, who was the lyricist and a musician who came up with a lot of the songs, had to work with Kane. But Kane said, I'm going to work with my own difficulty. So by having an Ebenezer Scrooge who is not, as you say, a good dancer, who's not a good singer, as you well pointed out, it's because he's deprived himself of joy for so long that when he does experience joy or pain, it's fragile, wouldn't you say?
Yes. Well, it's awkward. It's something, and you can
Yeah.
see it in Kane's performance. He has feelings throughout his journey that he hasn't felt like in decades, probably. When he watches these moments from the past, you can see in Kane's performance that he's seen these things for the first time. He's seen these parts of his life with new eyes, and
Yeah,
it's beautiful in his performance. I mean, it's real touching.
normally when you see an actor in a period piece, you get annoyed with them because if they are too contemporary in their choice, you feel that they're not doing homage, they're not really understanding the setting. But because Kane is such a marvelous actor, I do feel that he plays Dickens within the 19th century, but his sensibility and the psychology and vulnerability that he brings to him is much more of a contemporary person who we can better relate to than what I consider to be the more overly theatrical. I'm Ebenezer Scrooge, and I'm going to talk like this.
Well,
And
it's
I'm going
not
to go,
a it's
oh.
yeah, it's not a theatrical performance.
You know,
I mean, it's
because
for the screen. I mean, everything
that
is in his face.
that iconic version of Scrooge can get old real fast in a modernist sensibility. Or no, it isn't. The weird thing about this film, because there's Muppets in it, there's less Scrooge. So we actually get less of Scrooge's story in this movie because we keep on having to stop to make time for all the Muppets. So Kane actually has to work twice as hard to sell you on Scrooge because there's less of him than any other version of Scrooge.
Well, if that's the case, I mean, Kane just still did the best job, I think, of any Scrooge. I
So
mean,
let's talk about
his approach to the character is just perfect, I think.
so let's talk about the design, the production design and cinematography. Czech cinematographer Val Strelkovic, who just passed away last year, and the cinematographer John Fenner both had worked on a lot of Muppet productions. Strelkovic has also done like The Valiant and The Borrowers. So they're very there's a unique problem, right, in filming Muppets and human beings on the same space.
Yeah, well, you need to get rid of the floor, and you have to have the puppeteers walk around in a ditch, and then your human actors have to walk around on top of it. Yeah, so what they laid planks and things, and I mean they have to shoot it on a set.
Right. It was
But
all a soundstage.
the
Yeah.
set looks great. The cinematographer, he shot everything with a very narrow focus. I mean, it looks beautiful. I shot on film in '92. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
The whole thing is beautiful. The lenses are very fast. I mean, it's
So
a
I
great
read
looking movie.
that the buildings in the London street scenes were constructed by hand, but diminished in size in order to achieve the appearance that the streets were relatively longer.
That's an old technique that Hollywood used, on sound stages for years. I mean, it looks great. I mean, this is like a classic Hollywood movie.
Yeah, because today we just use CGI. There's a at the end of the final musical, one of the last musical sequences, it feels like Christmas. I'm sorry, it's actually an early one. The musical sequence, it feels like Christmas, ends with a crane shot, and the short buildings become visibly seen in the background. And Henson explained on the DVD audio that they were aware of the problem during the shooting, but eventually decided that closing shot was worth it, as I believe not many people would notice here. I mean, they really were. They weren't trying to have the world's greatest set. They were doing the best they could with what they had. And I love how desaturated and gray looking everything is until the end of the film. I mean, with the exception of Freddy's house, the interior of Freddy's house, which has a good deal of color, everything else is desaturated and gray. And the thing is, by the late 60s, early 70s, live action versions of this story were all very naturalistic. They really wanted to give you some sort of historical accuracy. And then the animated stuff was just over the top expressionistic. And I felt like this kind of twined the two. What do you think?
Uh, it's so weird. It's so weird watching it because yeah, I think it fits together seamlessly. It's just again, the Muppets are well cast and yeah, and the set is amazing. I mean, I don't know if I don't know if you look at past productions, I don't know if there's a production that captures 1800s London so well as this one. I mean, no one's ever been there that's alive, but I mean,
Well,
I
I
really
think that
I really felt the atmosphere of this one. I mean, they did a great job.
I did too, and I thought was interesting is that it's either hyper realistic or expressionistic, and this one felt cozy and warm without going to those two places. And okay, well, let's talk about the music. The score is by Miles Goodman, and the music is by Paul Williams. Paul Williams uh, won an Academy Award for the Rainbow Connection. So he actually started out. He did Bugsy Malone in the mid '70s, which is his own children's musical. I don't know if you ever saw it. We'll have to do a whole episode on that with a very young Jodie Foster and Scott Baio. Uh, he was a celebrity. He had a lot of pop songs. He was a very good pop songwriter. He was an actor. And then sometime around the end of the '70s, he discovered this wonderful thing called cocaine, which he would chase down with every piece of alcohol he could. And I'm sad to say it, he's the first to admit he has no memory of the '80s because he had got into a very serious drug and alcohol problem, and he didn't sober up until he was 49 in 1990, and then 2 months after he sobered up and got out of rehab, Jim Henson died, and Brian Henson had remembered how well he had worked with his dad on the other Muppet movies and just wanted to see if he was around because no one was giving Paul Williams a break. And Paul Williams said this about I was longing to live life in a totally new way, one day at a time, trusting that what I needed was within me to get things done. And I'm sitting down to write these songs, and I'm writing about Scrooge, a man who's learning to live life in a whole new way, who's having a spiritual awakening. It's like, okay, now this is my inventory of dealing with where I am in my own life. And even Henson says about Williams, he felt because of Williams's own experiences as a recovering alcoholic that he resonated almost more powerfully than anybody else with the redemption story of Scrooge. These are wonderful songs. I mean, you can really feel a sense of overflowing gratitude with this new lease on life, and you can feel it in like "It Feels Like Christmas," which is sung by the Ghost of Christmas Present, "Bless Us All," a prayer offered by Tiny Tim, and the final song that's of Scrooge's redemption with a thankful heart. A thankful heart. What do you think of the
Yeah, the
song?
music's great. The music's great. It's sad that they decided to cut
We'll
a few
get to that
songs out.
in a moment, but I just like the songs that are in there are pretty solid. So
Yeah,
yes,
really good
this
music,
is
and he
this
wrote
is
it
the
all
thing.
sober.
And he was using his own experience of what he had been feeling in his life. He won a Grammy for his collaboration in 2013 with Daft Punk on who wrote a song again. He's a really great songwriter, but I used to see him around Westwood all the time, like a little known. I know his current wife. She's a lovely woman. I'm not knocking you, Paul Williams. I think you're great. And my favorite song is called "When Love Is Gone" from that. I think It's one of my favorite Paul Williams songs, true, but it's my favorite song in the movie. And the last song is actually called When Love Is Found. So this is the song that's called When Love Is Gone. So earlier I had said, I really have a problem with the fact that the key moment of the movie is missing. Well, apparently they filmed it, and this 60-second sequence where Belle rebuffs young Ebenezer is actually a fairly chunky 5-minute musical sequence where after she rebuffs young Ebenezer, she does this. Meredith Bronner is the name of the singer. She's a West End musical theater performer. She does this lovely duet with Ebenezer, Michael Caine Ebenezer, called "When Love Is Gone," and it's about her her feelings of loss at the man that she had been in love with being too consumed by his own ambition to really have a place in her, in which she felt in his heart for her. And then he, modern day Ebenezer Scrooge, also thinking that about himself. And again, I don't know if it's because Kane himself is a very bad singer, but he literally chokes up and misses parts of the duet because he's so not able to speak. Uh, he's helplessly watching his greedy younger self lose the love of his life. He's literally, his voice cracks, and he can hardly get the words out through his tears. And this is the cathartic moment. This is the moment where we get to see uh, his pain, his suffering. What made Scrooge Scrooge? If he was willing to sacrifice the woman he loved for money, that he would be willing to sacrifice anything for money. But he didn't want to sacrifice her. He didn't know that would be the result until it happened, and it hurt him so much to the core. So Jeffrey Katzenberg, who at the time was God and head of Disney, said, "No, you got to cut that. You got to cut that because this movie will slow down the action for 5-year-olds." And that was the reason. And I'm really furious about it, folks. You can watch this clip on YouTube, and if you're watching us on YouTube, at the bottom of this thing, we'll put in a link to the scene. If you watch it on Disney Plus, where it's airing, by the way, it's on Disney Plus. How do they access it on Disney Plus? Because you got to see it.
So it's in the extras. Just click on the extras tab. You'll see it. You can watch it.
So
I mean, they say they want to put it back into the movie, but
they are
they just
putting
haven't
it back.
remastered it yet.
In December 9th, 2020, Henson confirmed to BBC Radio 2 that the original film negative featuring the entire footage of the song has been found by the Disney archivist and would be included in all future 4K releases. So if you're watching it, and please, folks, watch it, I would almost want to say that when you get to the scene on Disney Plus where you see him meet her and propose to her, and the minute she walks away from him, stop, go to extras, watch that song, then come back. Braun herself did release the song in a studio edition. So yeah, I really feel like it's this is really good Paul Williams. This is really, the music is very personal. It's very fun. The Muppets who sing do a really great job of singing. I think even the way that Tiny Tim works is really great. So I asked our friend Bill Gukwa, who saw it with his son when he was 12, what his son thought, and he thought it was okay. And I'll be honest with you, I think the best age group for this is probably maybe 10 and under. What do you think? If you're going to show it to kids, because it's very good at taking very scary things like death, love, loss, poverty, and because of the way they use Gonzo and the way they use the Muppets and all that, from getting it too dark, even though it's dark. But I would imagine someone who's a teenager might be a little bit too smart for it. What do you think?
Well, the story of the Christmas Carol, it's tough for younger people to relate to it, I think. I mean, you have to get old and realize you screwed up your life before you really start understanding this story.
Well, that's true. No, you're absolutely right. There's like 3 ages of your life where there's a Christmas Carol. There's when you're a child and it's a good scary ghost story. then you're no longer a child and it's dumb as hell. And then you become a middle-aged man and you go, oh damn, this the scariest parts of this whole story have nothing to do with the ghost.
When you become middle aged, you look at the story, you go, "Oh, I am Scrooge. Oops,
Yeah, I am Scrooge.
I screwed everything up." But yeah, I mean, I still think this is like the best version, and
So what age
I
group would
mean,
you agree with me that this is
everybody should. This is the everybody should be watching it. I mean,
how
I
old
don't
were you when you
know.
first saw this film?
I think I first saw it when we did our show last year.
So you
So
didn't see it in 92
I
either,
didn't see
right?
it in '92. No.
So that's what I'm saying. If parents are watching this, you're going to enjoy it because you're old enough to be a parent. And I think if your kid is 12 and under, awesome. I don't know, and I don't even think this should be the only Scrooge your kids should ever see. But I do think, compared to the animated Scrooge of my youth, who did that again? Robert Smith
Oh, Robert Williams did one in '71.
with
That's a
Alistair Sim.
short.
That's the
Yeah.
one I watched. That is way too scary for children, small children. That's brilliant. Show your 12-year-old to 18-year-old that one, and they'll love it.
Well, you know,
But if
there's one with starring Mickey Mouse, right? As
oh yeah, or
Cratchit.
yeah, there's one also with Mr. Magoo.
Yeah,
So
there's
all
the
of
Mr.
those.
Magoo. The Magoo one, I just want to say is actually the Mickey Mouse one. They're both fairly faithful to the book. I mean, Magoo
Yeah,
especially, I would say.
yeah, and maybe next year we'll do Magoo because I actually that's another one I haven't. No, did I see Magoo? I can't
I don't
remember.
know, but you know, the Magoo
No,
one's a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff in it
no, I
that
did see
most
the
other
Magoo one.
adaptations don't stick in there.
Yeah, the
It's
Magoo one
fun to
is
watch.
good, and it works really well. I think this is definitely better for same age group, or I would say if your kids are like 5 and under, go with Magoo, but if they're 5 to ages 12, go with this one. You're gonna enjoy it a lot, obviously, as a parent, but it's not scary, and a lot of the more interesting stuff will go over their heads while you're enjoying. I would say, compared to other Muppet movies, and this is just me personally, my favorite Muppet movie, is probably the first Muppet movie, and then up until seeing this, my second favorite Muppet movie was Muppets 2011, the one that came out about 10 years ago. I think I like this movie. This is my third favorite Muppet movie. Where do you rank it with Muppet movies?
Uh, I almost don't want to call it a Muppet movie because it's such a good adaptation of A Christmas Carol. I mean, I think it's the best one, like I said. I mean, but for a pure Muppet movie, yeah, the first one is great. I mean, the Muppets Take Manhattan, I've always liked. I mean, all the Muppet movies are fun. You know, all the Muppet movies are labors of love. I mean, they're not made for they're not made you know, to make the big bucks. You know what I mean? I mean, this movie
I
didn't
hear
make
you.
a lot of money. You know, I mean, to make movies like this, you have to be dedicated to the craft. Okay, these I mean, there's a lot easier ways to make to make money off a movie. You know,
No, I hear you. I totally hear you. I know this is your favorite. Did you say it was your favorite of the Christmas Carol adaptation?
yeah, I think I'm gonna put it at number one. Yes.
I would say for me, maybe either the George C. Scott version is. I think the George C. Scott version is maybe my favorite. And as far as musical adaptations go, the Albert Finney is my favorite. And as far as children's adaptations go, probably the Robert Smith is my favorite. And as far as contemporary ones go, the Patrick Stewart is my favorite. But that said, I love this movie, and I think it's a great performance by Michael Caine. And it's interesting. There's three kinds, in my opinion, of Christmas carols. There are the Marxist Christmas carols, there are the psychological Christmas carols, and there are what I want to call the religious Christmas carols. Even though it's not overtly religious, they speak to a certain degree of piety. And I feel like what's nice about this adaptation is it kind of has the spirituality, the economics, and the psychology. And if it's not the best in any of the three, it's certainly the most generous in showing all of those. And I do think it's certainly one of the most refreshing takes on Scrooge. If I have any criticism, it is, I think, the way they cut out a very important song that if maybe I'd seen it with the song, and I'll watch it again when they redo it, maybe that will make me grade it slightly higher. And I also have to admit, the only thing I have against it is there's just Scrooge is not the center of this production. He and the Muppets share stage, whereas in any other traditional version of A Christmas Carol, it really would be Scrooge's story entirely. That said, I think it's great. I'm so grateful for you for picking it last year. I apologize for not picking it this year. So, folks, go out. It's Christmas Eve. I hope you are not visited by your former business partners in chains. And I hope you're not visited by the ghosts of Christmas present, past, or the future, or yet to come. I hope you wake up tomorrow with a lovely feeling of joy and happiness. And even if I'm Jewish and I celebrate Christmas, I don't observe Christmas. Do you celebrate Christmas or do you observe Christmas, Randall?
I guess I'll say I observe Christmas, but Christmas is a pagan holiday. It's
Yes.
a cultural tradition that goes back way before Christianity. So I think we
And
can
there's
all
nothing
enjoy it.
really Christian in A Christmas Carol, thankfully. So it's not
Yeah,
about Christianity.
Dickens. I think Dickens, if I remember the research, he was mindful of that. He wanted a Christmas Carol to apply to everyone.
And the church at the time didn't give people a day off for Christmas. So actually, if anything, he would have been critical of established religion. And he did not live a very pious life himself.
Well, yeah, just to go into the history of it, a lot of people say A Christmas Carol helped define Christmas traditions things that we think of as Christmas traditions. This work helped create them.
So if you have the time, folks, we'll leave you links, right? Randall will leave them links to the older episodes that we did on it.
Okay.
So you can hear what we have to say. Those are really good episodes. They're longer. You could end up having 3 hours of in-depth analysis. And anyway, Merry Christmas. Until then, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Happy holidays.